Hello, my name is Christopher Freeze, and I represent the Hope Science Institute of Mississippi. And I'm excited to be with you today to share with you my presentation entitled The Science of Hope. Now, when we talk about the science of hope, we're going to be talking about something that is not just an opinion. It's not just something I read about and decided I'd share with you. It's something that's based on thousands of research studies, something that we can believe in, something we can put our trust in, and something that I know will change people's lives. What if there was something that was a significant predictor? Something that was a significant predictor of whether somebody was going to feel burned out in their job? What if something was a significant predictor of whether teams would work well together? And what if there was something that was a significant predictor, even a better predictor of your likelihood to succeed in your first year of college than your ACT, your SAT, or even your high school GPA? And what if there was something that, when we fully embraced it, would change people's lives? Well, because you know what we're here to talk about today, that should not surprise you that the answer is hope. And it's hope that is not, as I said, just something that is a wish. It's not something that we just get up one morning and say, I wish things would be better. It's something we can believe in, something that's concrete, something, as we said, was supported by science. You know, in Mississippi, we do hope. Now, I know what you're thinking. We need to do a lot of things in Mississippi. Are we sure that hope is at the top of that list? And I'd have to answer by saying that, yes, it is. When we look at all the things that we're trying to accomplish and we wonder, why haven't we been more successful? Why haven't we gotten further? Why haven't things changed? Then I would argue it's not because we didn't hope things would change. I would argue it's because we didn't understand the science behind hope and the framework that we're going to talk about in a little while. You know, we began really this idea of in Mississippi, we do hope back in about March or April of this year. So we've been doing some work before then, but it culminated in a conference that we held throughout the state at a couple of different locations where we trained over 1,300 personnel related to different court teams in the juvenile justice system. So a number of CPS workers and Division of Youth Service workers and school attendance officers and the judges and the court administrators themselves. And we are trying to bring to them this idea that maybe we can do things differently. Maybe we can change the lives that we've been hoping to change for so long, if perhaps we just shift our paradigm a little bit and maybe use this framework. Now, this framework is one that's not, again, something that we created out of thin air. It's based on the work of Dr. Chan Hellman. Now, Dr. Hellman is a professor at Oklahoma University at the Tulsa campus, and he has his own research center called the Hope Research Center. And he's been looking at how hope affects people's lives for well over a decade, based on, he used his work based on the work of Dr. Snyder from the 90s and early 2000s. And he and his business partner, Casey Gwinn, wrote this book, Hope Rising, How the Science of Hope Can Change Your Life. And I hope if you've not had a chance to read it, that you will obtain a copy of this book, because it really can change lives. Now, what Dr. Hellman is really interested in is not just hope as a grand gesture, as this grand idea. It's really, how do you help people have more hope when they are affected by trauma, when they are affected by adversity? How can you actually give them something that they can take with them and order their lives around so that they can make a change in their lives? And how do we, as professionals and people who interact with them on a regular basis, actually help motivate them and encourage them in a way that will help them be more successful? Now, we're going to talk later about success, and I'm not suggesting that you have to be successful every time in order to be hopeful. But what I'm suggesting is that when we change and reorder our framework and we shift our paradigms, then whether we move forward or even move backwards a little bit, as long as we're continually moving towards our goals, we are going to change people's lives. If I ask you to think about what are some of the most prevalent social health issues that maybe pose a threat to our communities or pose a threat to individuals, what would you suggest? I mean, if you think about that, what are some of the things that really come to mind each time that we worry and consider about the social ills and the social health of our city and our state, our nation? Well, as a law enforcement officer for over 23 years for the FBI, those ideas came to my mind on a regular basis because I'm trying to think about how do I help in my capacity protect the citizens of the state of Mississippi during the last part of my career. And in 2017, in a Police Chief magazine, they asked that question, what do you think are the most prevalent social health issues, to chiefs of police around the country? And they came back with these three: substance abuse, mental illness, and homelessness. Now, I know all of you can probably speak to each one of those way better than I can. But when we look at those issues, I'm convinced that they are not the problem in and of themselves. They are really a symptom of what's going on in a person's life. And that the root cause of substance abuse, of mental illness, of homelessness, or a host of other social health issues that we can name, is trauma. It's adversity. It's the way people have been raised for generations. And when you cannot see beyond what's in front of you because of the pain that's in your life, because of the trauma that's in your life, then these are the issues that will come to the forefront. And when we try to address simply these issues, man, it's just like putting a Band-Aid on a major cut, major artery bleed. It's not going to do anything. We need to really get to the heart of the issue and find ways in which we can address that trauma that's in people's lives. Really, because we're asking people to have more well-being. We want more well-being in people's lives. And how do we go about doing that? Now, you know as well as I, because I'm sure that you have heard this same question, what is wrong with you? It's really that question that comes from the medical field. When you go into the doctor, you say, doctor, I got this pain. Well, what's wrong with you? Well, it hurts when I do this. And what do? Well, they might say, well, stop doing that. But they might give you some medication. They really have, particularly today, they're really not taking the time to find out the history that might have led up to why you have a particular pain or illness. All they're concerned about at the moment is, how do I reduce the adversity in the sense that I'm reducing that symptom? Remember, it's a symptom. They're trying to reduce what's presented to them. And so we find that when we see people who have depression, anxiety, disengagement, or dysregulation, oftentimes, now maybe not with my group here because you're more trauma informed, but oftentimes our mental health professionals and our health professionals are simply trying to reduce the symptoms for a number of reasons, because that's all the time they have, because they're not really well versed in how to get to the heart of the problem, or any other issue. But we know, because we have been trauma informed or are trauma informed, that we're trying to move from what is wrong with you to the question of what happened to you. We really want to know what happened to this individual that led them to the point in their life where they are right now, that we see them, that we're engaging with them, so that we can better understand that root problem. And it's really moving from the doctor, the professional, sort of being at the center of attention because we're the professional, to putting that client really at the center and having a client-centered approach and focusing not on what's wrong with somebody, but what is right with somebody, because this is that area where we thrive. If we're trying to get to a higher level of well-being, we got to focus not on what is wrong with that individual and all the problems they're exhibiting, but let's focus on the positive aspect. And that's really what some of the positive psychology and other things have taught us over the last couple of decades. What is right with an individual? And we can go from there. When we talk about hope, when we talk about those best predictors, and we talk about well-being, then you should know that the science says that hope is the single best predictor of a child and family's capacity to thrive. Is it the only predictor? No. But it is the best predictor. And if we're trying to make a big improvement in somebody's life, wouldn't it be nice if we focused on what is considered the best predictor? And I think that's what we're going to study today and look more at today. Look, you know the ACE study. Most of you do anyway. You know that when we're trying to understand trauma and understand adverse childhood experiences, that we really are relying on the work primarily of Dr. Felitti and Dr. Anda. And as I said, and we'll talk about just a little bit more, the 10 most common, but even then, I think we're just looking at what the results are and not really fully appreciating and understanding what led them to this sort of discovery, right? So we're looking at well-being and the idea that people are trying to have better health. And Dr. Felitti was focused in the 80s on trying to help people have better physical health. And his work was with people who needed to lose some weight. Now, we all might argue, yeah, I need to lose a little weight. But the people that Dr. Felitti was working with are people who wanted to lose 400, 500, 600 pounds. And they had not been successful in their lives. And so he developed a method that over basically a year, he could help people reduce their weight by hundreds of pounds. And they were successful. Lots and lots, hundreds and hundreds of people went through their program and lost considerable weight. But what he realized after doing this for a number of years was that people would drop out of the program about halfway through. I mean, they're on the trajectory of losing the weight that they wanted to lose, but they quit before they finished the program. And then if they actually did finish the program, within that next subsequent year, many of them put not only just weight back on, but the same amount they had lost and sometimes more. And this was driving Dr. Felitti just nuts. He said, I cannot understand why people are not sticking with the program and being successful. So he did what any good sort of scientist would do. He started doing interviews and surveys. And he interviewed a woman who had been successful in the program, had lost a few hundred pounds, had achieved her ideal weight, but within a month of completing the program, had put about 35 pounds back on. And then, as I said, as happened to a lot of other people, within a year, she put almost all the same weight back on. And so he's asking her questions. And he wants to know, how old were you when you were, how much did you weigh when you were born? How much did you weigh when you went to first grade? How much did you weigh when you went to high school? How old were you when you were first sexually active? How old were you when you got married? And he realized that in the asking of those last couple of questions, how old were you when you were sexually active? He asked it wrong, because the answer that he got from the woman was that she only weighed 40 pounds. And he goes, wait a minute, I know I asked you how much you weighed, but really I wanted to know how old you were. And she goes, I was 4 years old. Is when my father sexually abused me. And he goes, this is only the second case of incest that he'd heard about in his medical profession. And he said, this can't be right, because if this incest was a problem, we'd have heard about it by now in medical school. We never really were taught anything about it. And so he asked her again, and she still gave the same answer. Later, as he did more and more interviews, more and more people were admitting that they had been sexually abused as children, and that had led to their weight gain. You see, people put the weight on as a protection. In fact, a young woman who he was interviewing said that she had been sort of solicited by a man in her business after losing all this weight, and it so shocked and traumatized her that she reverted to the behavior that she had all those years. And that was a way to feel safe, was to be unattractive, to put all this weight back on, because that's when she felt safe. And this was a story that Dr. Flitty heard over and over. And he worked with Dr. Anda, who's at the CDC, and they did this big study of over 17,000 people. And they came up with what we now understand as the 10 adverse childhood experiences, the ones that are most prominent, most prevalent. And that is physical, emotional, sexual abuse, physical, emotional neglect, mental illness, substance abuse, divorce or separation of the parents, incarceration of someone in the home, or domestic violence. Now, those aren't the only ones, as you know. Since that study, we've had additional surveys and science that have proven that things such as poverty and the violence in the neighborhoods, in an environment, and bullying can all be, and racism can all be adverse childhood experiences. But these were the most 10 that were offered during that time. And so they've sort of remained the top 10. And we've learned through their work that at least 64% of people have at least one of those ACEs. And this study's been replicated over the years throughout the not only country, but around the world. It still comes back to the same basic percentage. And 12.5% have 4 or more of those ACEs. Now, if you're like me, you hear that 12.5% and 4 or more, and it's kind of really hard maybe to wrap your head around just how big or that problem really is, how great that challenge really is. But if you take the population of the United States and multiply it by 12.5%, you're talking over 41 million people who have 4 or more of those ACEs, who have 4 or more adverse childhood experiences, significant traumatic events in their lives that, if left unmitigated, if left unaddressed, can have a lifetime effect. And the effects such as less life, because your years of life on average are 5 years less. 2.5 more times likely to have lung disease and hepatitis. 3 times more likely to have depression, and 6 times more likely to have sex before the age 15, or 7 times more likely to become an alcoholic, or even 12 times more likely to commit suicide. And 6+ ACEs, 20 years less of life on average. Now, I always pause here to say, look, this is not a causation. You are not destined to have all these potential adverse health effects because of what's happened in your childhood. But there is a correlation. When they look at people who have had all these particular adversities and challenges with their health, they find all these ACEs in their background. And so we can't ignore it. We can't say it doesn't exist. We can't say it's somebody else. We have to be willing to acknowledge that it is prevalent. And it is at the heart of what we're trying to do. And Dr. Hellman's going, how do I take this and try to help instill hope in people in a way that actually can have a positive outcome? And that's what we want to talk about, because we know that our children are the ones that need to be taught and helped today in order to change their life for tomorrow. And if on average, a child has 1.61 of these ACEs, then it should shock us and compel us to make changes in people's lives. To the children who've been exposed to domestic violence when they've got 4.4 on average, to those who encounter the juvenile justice system who have 4.29, and those who are in our foster care system who have as many as 5.68 on average. These are just huge numbers compared to the average child who has only 1.61. And I know you're committed to making those changes. That's why I'm excited to share with you the science of hope. Now, I know many of you remember Shane Gerard. Shane was a great man who did many things for our community through our state. And he shared with me a number of years ago these words that really did change my life and how I saw some of the issues, some of those challenges that we talked about earlier, particularly around substance abuse, but really around anything. When he told me that substance abuse is a physical response to an emotional pain, I'm thinking, wow, even I feel that. I know when I do certain things physically, I'm trying to mitigate that emotional pain. And the substance abuse is not just the opioid problems that we have today. It's not just someone taking cocaine or heroin. You could fill in the blank anywhere. You could fill in pornography. You could fill in addictive shopping. You could fill in any behavior that we do as individuals when we are trying to mitigate and tamp down that emotional pain. And what do we replace that emotional pain with? Just a positive attitude? Just a do better attitude? What about if we replace that emotional pain with hope? And not, again, just hope that's wishful thinking, but that hope that will make a difference in a person's life. Because when we encounter these individuals, when we encounter us, remember that 12.5% is for everybody. And so we look at the people who are attending our conference today. The odds are 12.5% of you have at least 4 or more of these ACEs. And when we look at how does this trauma, how does what happened to us in the past affect us in the present, we recognize that probably the most serious thing is our inability to trust others. I mean, at the heart of every relationship is trust. And yet the trauma has undermined our ability to trust others. The people that we were supposed to have the closest relationship with, the ones that we loved unconditionally, those who are our parents, are our primary caregivers, who did not provide us a safe, stable, and nurturing environment, instead inflicted upon us these ACEs, undermined our ability to trust others, because we can't trust those who we thought we loved the most and who said they loved us. And if I can't trust the adults who brought me up, how am I ever going to trust you? The mental health provider, the physical health doctor, social workers, CPS workers, anybody else who's working with children. What makes you think they're going to trust you when they can't trust others? And so when you see that they react by thinking that danger is everywhere, when they have difficulty with new changes and new transitions and new people in their lives, and they act guarded and anxious, and they reject the support that you're trying to offer, and become dysregulated either physically or emotionally, and cannot calm down after an outburst, what do we expect? And when we, for most of us, think that we can get over things and we won't hold grievances or grudges. Here's people who hold grievances for a long time. And worst of all, perhaps, is that they're unable to recognize how to do something different, how to make that change, because every day is the same thing. And it just becomes overwhelming. And it just weighs on us. And we don't know how to help people who it seems as though they're not helping themselves. As if that's a condition for our help, is that they have to help themselves first. And we see the same people over and over again. And we're just wondering, when will things change? Can they change? Can things get better? Can things get better? My answer to that? Absolutely, they can get better. Of course they can get better. We wouldn't be here today if we didn't think things could get better. You don't need my Science of Hope talk to understand that there's always something that we can do. You are looking for answers because you're attending this conference, you're attending these breakout sessions, you're hoping to hear something that's going to make a difference in not only your life, but the lives of people you work with. And I'm suggesting to you that what will make a difference, the best predictor of well-being, is hope. And so we got to ask the question, all right, Chris, you set us up, you led us down that primrose path here where we can see all the problems around us. We can see all the symptoms of people having trauma in their lives, and we've not really found a lot of good antidotes to that. And you're saying that this hope thing is supposed to make a difference. Tell me what hope is. I'd be happy to do so. Hope is a belief that your future will be better than today. And you have the power to make it so. And that's Dr. Hellman's definition of it. And if we were together, I'd ask you to read this with me out loud. And I want us to stop after the comma. Now you're on mute probably, and so you can do this. So I encourage you to read it out loud because I want you to hear those words. I want you to let them resonate in your head, and so you can think about it. Hope is a belief that your future will be better than today. Now, if we stop there, what is that? That's just optimism, right? Maybe that's power of positive thinking. Tomorrow can't be any worse than today. Tomorrow's got to be better. When we talk about the word belief, that means we sort of trust that things will get better. We have faith that things will get better. And yet, as we just said, if this trauma was in our lives and it undermines our ability to have trust, then how are we ever going to believe, have faith that things will be better tomorrow or in the future? But when we add that last phrase, and you have the power to make it so, it shifts it from everybody else's responsibility and all the things that might happen to us out in the world to now something intrinsic, something inside us that says, wait a minute, you mean I have power to make this change? And the answer is yes. Now, the type of power I'm talking about is not that sort of wishy-washy, just maybe, it might work, it might not, here's the power of positive thinking. I remember when I was in college, I just got into school, and I'm sort of introverted and introspective, and I'm sort of a little scared about things. And I don't really put myself out there very well. And And I certainly felt small. I felt really small. But at the same time, as I was going to college, just a little bit before, this cartoon had come out. He-Man, are you familiar with the He-Man cartoon? You know, the big guy that looked like he lifted weights his entire life, right? Didn't look anything like me. But he could reach behind him and he could grab hold of his sword when confronted with the problem. He'd pull it out and he would say, "I have the power." That's the type of power I'm talking about. You have a power within you to make this change. We talk about empowering people. And what we're going to talk about with hope is just that. How do we help people find the power within and empower them in a way that they can feel confident, they can trust that your future will be better today than it has been in the past? And it's based on three different tenets. The fact that, one, we have goals, and two, that we have way power, and three, that we have willpower. Goals, pathways, and willpower. And as I said earlier, without the pathways, it's really just positive thinking. Actually, without the way power, it's just a wish. And I use the word agency, that's more the scientific term. And sometimes people confuse that with the agency that they work for or the agency that they're going to get help from. And so Dr. Hellman and others have really sort of changed agency to way power. But without that power that comes from having a pathway, then all we're talking about is that wish. And I don't want to wish because wishes don't do anything for me. What I want is a framework that allows us to better understand hope. And so Dr. Hellman has the simplicity of hope, but it's not simplistic, right? We're really talking about goals that really are the endpoint of purposeful behavior. We might say intentional behavior, right? It's not just sitting back and letting causes affect us. We're actually doing something that will drive where we're going. We're seeking something that will, as we said, have a change in our lives. And adversity, oftentimes, is what prevents us from achieving our goals, right? When we have these barriers in our way, when we have people themselves that get in our way, or we have situations that come up in our lives that we just don't know how to get around, then that adversity can keep us from achieving those goals. And goals can either be short-term or long-term. And how much stress we have in our lives really can affect our ability to achieve those goals. And goals can be avoidant or achievement. It's really that mindset, right? And Dr. Hellman tells a story of when he was graduating of high school. He'd been homeless a number of years. And he's walking across the stage feeling good that he is actually graduated. He really wasn't thinking about what was next. And everybody in front of him said, "I'm going to go to college." And so as he walked up and he realized, here's where I am in my life and the challenges I had before me because of the homelessness and adversity that were in my life, when asked by the principal, "Jan, what are you going to do?" He said, "I'm going to go to college." Now, to us, that's an achievement goal. For most of us anyway, we're thinking, hey, we're hoping all of our kids go to college. We're hoping that they set that goal in front of them and that they work to achieve it. But for Dr. Hellman, it was an avoiding goal because he wanted to avoid the consequences of what was going on in his life at that moment. He didn't really have a long-term plan. He just knew that he had to get out of the situation he was in at the moment. I think we find that a lot in the people that we work with, right? And it's hard for us to tell, and we can't be judgmental. If you would ask somebody their goal and they gave you a goal, it's not our job to say, "Hey, that's great, that's an achievement goal." Or, "Oh, it seems like you're just trying to avoid things." it's a goal that we can work with. And we can't just dismiss it. Because we're going to help them with their pathways. We need to help them develop the strategies, the mental roadmaps that are necessary to achieve that goal. And this is where, if we have the strategy set out in our life and people are helping us navigate, then when those barriers come up, we can find a way around them. And not only just a way, but oftentimes multiple ways. And the more we're able to get this is what's good. The more we're able to create and imagine multiple ways around barriers, the higher our level of hope. In fact, we could be considered to be high hope individuals as compared to someone who can see no other way than just the path ahead of them, might be considered low hope individuals. And if you have high hope, that's going to help naturally develop your willpower. And that's what we, as part of their community, part of the people that surround them to help them, are trying to encourage. But willpower comes from within. It's that mental energy that allows us to pursue our pathways, right? And it takes a lot of focus, right? It takes a lot of focus to put our attention onto something that really, to this point, we had no faith in or trust in or unsure about, and all the traumas going on in our lives, and now you want me to do X, do something? And if all those things are happening in my life, there's a substance abuse problem, there's a mental health problem, perhaps I'm homeless, perhaps I have poverty in my life, perhaps there's violence in my community, perhaps my father is in jail, perhaps my parents are separated, perhaps all I remember in my home or what I have at home is domestic violence, then you're trying to give me some new pathway, some new program, something that is the latest and greatest, and you want me to do it. I hadn't got the mental energy to do that. I'm just trying to survive, just trying to get through today. And so how can I help as a professional, an individual, to bolster, to create, to imagine something that's different, to find the energy to put that one step in front of the other and to see a goal down the road and actually go towards it. And that's where hope, that's where having this framework, that's where talking about things using the vocabulary of goals, pathways, and willpower makes a huge difference. And so let's talk about the experience of hope a little bit, right? So you've identified your goal. You've identified something that you think has value. And you've also identified a pathway to get there. In fact, you're going to move from the identified pathway to that goal. And yet, how well can you bring your willpower to the table? How well can you foster it? How well can you develop it? How well can you focus that willpower? Particularly when there's attention distractors, the things that we just spoke about, and all that trauma that's been unmitigated, that robs us of the hope. How can we see that? And so I want to share with you an example of that Dr. Hellman often uses in his presentations that I think really allows us to pull all these things together. Now, this would be great, again, if we were in person. I'd love to have somebody step forward and help me with this, but I'll just call upon you to work with me in your ideas and your imagination, to think about what it would be like to drive a stick shift car, particularly for the first time. Now, if some of you, like me, grew up on a farm or grew up in the country, perhaps you drove stick shifts regularly. But even if you know how to drive it now, there was a first time when you drove a stick shift. But if you're the type of individual that's never had that pleasure of having to navigate everything, I want you to think with me what that might look like. Can you see your car? Can you see a car that has the stick shift, right? Has the little knob that has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and an R on it right here to your right? Can you look down on the floorboard and see those 3 pedals? You know that the accelerator is, and you're pretty sure that's a brake, but you're not sure. What's this 3rd pedal? What's that all about? Oh, that's a clutch. I'm not even sure how to do that clutch. But we'll find ourselves, can we imagine ourselves sitting in that car? We hadn't done anything yet. We hadn't turned it on. We're not going anywhere. We're just sitting in that car. And yet, as we think about the brake and as we think about shifting, and perhaps as this picture demonstrates, we see that road ahead of us. Can we imagine, without ever doing anything at all up to this point, driving down that road? Can we think about how fun that might be? Perhaps your car is a convertible, right? The wind blowing through your hair. You've seen pictures of people doing that, and that really, really excites you. But can you just imagine, before we do anything, your ability to drive down that road to achieve your goal? Now, this is important because it brings up the first main concept of hope, and that is that imagination is a driving instrument of hope, right? We have to be able to imagine what that future is going to look like. And so, as we've talked about with people who have a lot of trauma in their lives, they're just surviving for today. Can they actually imagine a better future? And sometimes we may need to help paint that future for them and help them see how things are better. But at the end of the day, it's got to be intrinsic. It's got to be something on the inside that says, yes, I can see something a little bit different. All right, so you're sitting in that car, and now it's time to move, right? This is your only means of transportation. The only lottery that you've won is this car, and it's a stick shift, and you have no other means to get from point A to B, and you've really got to get to point B. And so I got to figure out how to drive this car. So I can imagine myself sitting in this car. I can imagine myself turning it on, right? And I've engaged the clutch, that 3rd pedal. I've engaged the brake. Perhaps the stick shift is in neutral as I've done this. And now I'm getting ready to put it into gear. And what's going through our head at this time? We're going, I hope I don't kill the car, kill the engine, right? And what happens when you put it in gear for the first time and try to go? You kill the engine, right? And you got to start all over again. So you depress the clutch, you press the brake, put it in neutral, you turn the car on again, and you ease it into gear, and you let off the clutch a little bit, and maybe it jerks forward just a few steps. Okay. And you do it again. And you do it again. And before you know it, you've actually gone down the road a little bit. Which brings us to our second big point. The more adversity that you face, and the more you covet the goal that you're seeking, the more likely that you are to keep at it. Right? Because if you had other means of transportation that wasn't so difficult as driving a stick shift, you take it, right? Whether it's a bus or a different car, if you had a horse, you'd ride the horse. But because this is your only means of achieving your goal, the more adversity that you're willing to undergo, the greater your chance of succeeding your goal. And you actually are in the process of building hope. And the problems that will come to you in life are the problems that when that car is not just on flat ground, now it's maybe parked on a hill, and behind you is that brand new BMW that somebody parked right up close to your bumper. And now you got to navigate that, and you start feeling all this extra pressure that's on you. man, I'm starting to sweat, starting to feel like, this is not going to go well. And I'm starting to see that, man, the adversity is just piling on and on. But because I've had a little success, and because I've overcome a few things, and because I know I can do this, because I have done this in the past, I've not always been successful. Remember, when we tried it, we killed the car maybe half a dozen times before we actually got going. If success begets success, then we would say, oh no, now, I'm unsuccessful, therefore I'm a failure. No, hope begets hope, which is our third tenet. Because of all these things that are around us, and because I've understood that I've gotten a little bit further each time I've done it, and because I've become a little bit more focused on it, I'm able to increase my hope. I know I may not always succeed every time, but I'm building hope upon hope. And I'm building hope upon hope. And so finally, I'm driving this car down the road, maybe the country road, and because I can do it in the country, I can now do it in the city. And because I can do it in my small town city, maybe I can do it driving to New Orleans. And if I can drive in New Orleans, maybe I can drive in Los Angeles or New York. I can certainly drive on the interstates. But I'm able to do this because I've built hope. And maybe people have helped me build hope, but I built hope and begat hope and begat hope. And my willpower increases. When I first was involved in driving this car, the only thing I could think about was not killing the car, not hitting that BMW right behind me. But now that I've driven this car, 100 times, 1,000 times, how much willpower does it take now? It didn't take any, because it's become ingrained, because I know I can do this. And therefore, I'm able to achieve my goal because I've seen the pathway and overcome any barriers, and I've been able to keep my motivation, my willpower going over and over. And that's what we're talking about. And so where do you focus your attention? How are you able to focus your attention? If I asked you to close your eyes right now and just started thinking about whatever came into your mind, odds are many of us would think about the future. It seems, based on research, that that's the type of people we are. We are future-oriented type of individuals. Yes, we sometimes think about the past, but all things being equal, we are more likely to think about the future and to imagine how things might be different, how we might be at different situations. It could be the future of what you're going to do after this presentation, at the end of the day, at the end of the week. It could be imagining what that vacation's like, or when you're going to, now that we're getting close to the end of the year, what Christmas or holidays might look like. Maybe it's that job you're seeking. You can imagine how things are going to be better. And when you do think about the past, you have the memory of what happened. And sometimes, as I said, our attention goes back to the past, to people we were involved in, to family, to friends, what those experiences were like. And in and of itself, those things aren't good or bad. But when we think about things, they can either be positive or negative. We could be thinking about the positive things that come into the future. We might be thinking about some hard conversation we're going to have with a colleague or an employee, and we may feel kind of negative about it. And when we think about the past, we may think about the good things that happened to us, or we could be thinking about the trauma. And so if we think about the things that in the future that are negative, we begin to worry. And if we think about the things in the past, we kind of ruminate on it, and we become anxious, and we find that we then suffer, because that's where the negative emotions come in. That's where we start doing things to cope, using those substance abuses. And then we realize that the attachments we have with other people really are very weak, very insecure, don't have anything concrete. But on the other hand, if we have the positive, then we have hope of what the future could be. And on the positive side, when we look in the back, we're nostalgic about all the good things that happened. And it's really those good things that happened in the past that help us think about how great things can be in the future. And all of a sudden, we have positive things going in our lives. and we have positive emotions, and we find good coping mechanisms for any potential anxiety that's there. And we're able to get through things because we have a secure attachment with other people. They're there helping us on this path. Now, Brene Brown said, you cannot shame or belittle people into changing their behaviors. Now, and I'm afraid that's what a lot of us have done to other people and what other people have done to us. Right? We've tried to, maybe we've acknowledged that we have something that we'd like to change. Maybe we'd like to lose all that weight. Maybe we'd like to stop smoking. Maybe we want to work out more. Maybe we want to go back to school so that we can have a better, either complete an education or perhaps potential for another job. And somebody that's around us, their way of motivating is to sort of shame us into thinking about how unworthy we are, or that our own being, our own personhood is not as good as it could be because of these challenges that we're faced with. Now, I don't know about you, but how often when somebody sort of shames us into trying to do something that we actually succeed? I mean, you might for a few days clean up your act or change things, but there's no real motivation. That's an extrinsic motivation. And that doesn't last. Now, Dr. Hellman would say, look, if we nurture hope, people will go through our programs with a higher rate of success. Now, did he say they're going to be 100% successful? No. But what he has found in his research was that people will be more successful in completing the programs that we know are important if we're nurturing hope, not shaming or cajoling or forcing people, but if we're helping them see a better future and identify that goal and a way to that goal, and then help them increase their willpower and their motivation, they will be more successful. They will be more successful. Look, hope is a process. And if I ask you to sort of to think about hope, many of you might think, well, I always thought it was a feeling, right? I feel hopeful, or I don't feel hopeful, or, I have some joy within me, or, I have something that gets me excited. But it's really a way of thinking. And we can see how that thinking plays out when we realize that when we lose hope, that we're going down this stair step. And if I asked you what was the opposite of hope, I think many of you would probably say, like a lot of people do, must be despair. I think despair is the opposite of hope. Well, it turns out even with despair, there is at least a little bit of hope within someone. What really is at the opposite of hope is apathy. It's apathy. So we see this, somebody gets angry because the goal that they were seeking is significantly blocked, right? All of a sudden, they are headed toward the right way and something's jumped up in front of them and they don't see a way around it, and they're angry. They don't see a way around it, and things aren't going well, and it's the way it always is, and nothing ever goes right. And I never can be successful. And it's always this and it's always that. And the anger just was there, and it becomes more and more. And then they slip down into that despair because I don't see any way around this. And there's no other pathway available. And I don't know what to do. But we can work with that. Where it becomes hard to work with somebody is when they get to the point that they're apathetic. They have lost hope. There is no motivation. See, with despair, if I could show you a different way, if I could show you a new pathway, how to overcome the obstacles that are in your path, you might be open to that. You would consider it. If you asked a student, what are your goals? And he goes, I don't have any. That's tough. That's a challenge. They don't see any way to move forward in the future. But if you said, what are your goals? And they said, for today, and you said, I don't know. There's a slight difference there. See, with I don't know, they're still thinking, I'm not quite sure what they are, but I'm willing to think about it. I'm just not sure I've identified them for today. But when we look at the people who are more apt to commit suicide, to attempt it, at least to focus on it, they see no way forward. And they've lost all motivation to even make that change, to even listen to what's going on. But what's great about hope? Because I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't true, is that hope can be taught. And not only can hope be taught, it can be learned. Right? It's not something outside the grasp of my ability to think. I can teach you. We are working through today even the basic foundations of a new way of thinking, a new way of seeing the world, a new way of seeing our problems, and shifting our paradigms in a way that can make things different, can make things better. And because it can be taught and because it can be learned, we can make a difference in a person's life. We can nurture that hope. When we help somebody understand and clarify what their goals are, all of a sudden, I have clarity and I become a little bit more motivated because I can see that future. I can imagine that future. Beforehand, everything was clouded. It was like driving that car in a dark day or a cloudy day or lots of rain. I couldn't see beyond the windshield. But when we're nurturing hope, all of a sudden I see a better path ahead. And when I see a better path and I see a roadblock come up, because you're working with me and because you understand the framework of hope and because you've helped me understand it, I now can think about what are some ways around this barrier. How can I adjust my behavior? How can I adjust the circumstances to get beyond what before in my life might have just brought me to a halt? And if I can do that, all of a sudden my willpower is a little bit more. And my willpower is a little bit more. And a little bit more. And all of a sudden, as I said earlier, that hope is begetting hope. And I can imagine that future. And I'm willing to overcome more adversity in my life. And then because I've got good relationships with people and they're helping me, they're reinforcing the decisions I'm making, then I have built up that hope. And I'm more likely to complete the programs. And so for us, I think part of what we need to think about, though, as professionals, is whether or not the goal that we're asking them to attain is their goal or our goal. See, too many of us, because of the systems that we work in, because of the way we've always done it, or because we feel like what we're asked somebody to do is an imposition from other people, we impose our goals on them. And we can't do that. We have to let them create their own goals. Now, they may still have to follow our requirements, but our requirements then become pathways to helping them achieve what they want to achieve. Because if it's our goal, that's why we see this continual over and over again, things aren't going as way that they should. And the success isn't where it should be. But we can change it by nurturing hope. And let me leave you with some strategies, right? Introduce the concept of hope and discuss its core components. Talk about this simple framework of goals, pathways, and willpower. Help them develop relevant goals within their lives. You may have to help them imagine things, but you can do it. Help them understand and list out the different possible pathways that they could go through to achieve their goal, and help them identify what their willpower is. Help find things that might motivate them. Dr. Helen talks about creating these future memories. And it's really looking at the past and seeing when you've been successful in achieving a goal and thinking about how that felt and what it looked like. And then saying, when I achieve this goal, I'm going to have that same exciting feeling of accomplishment or or whatever. And that's what we're asking them to do, is to help find something that motivates them. When they have problems, let's identify them and help solve them and create that map of what that future is going to look like. And then finally, if it's just something that we can't get around, because those things happen, not every one of our goals is achievable. But we don't start from the standpoint of, oh, well, you can't do that, let's do something else. We work at it until they realize, maybe I need to kind of reframe it and re-go it. And we can do that. Look, creating a hope-centered community is really what we're trying to do. And at the heart, as it says here, of change is our ability to understand the way things are right now in our lives. And that for things to change, and that for change to happen, we must imagine the way things could be. And that's what I'm asking you today. As a professional, the line of business that you're in, the work that you do, I'm asking you to think about how things can be different. Set that goal for how things are different. Identify the pathways that will help you get there and help build that motivation and focus your attention in ways that perhaps you've not done before. And then use this framework for the people you're working with. Ask them, what are your goals? You might be surprised at the answer you receive. Hope Science Institute's here to help you and your agency, your organization, develop hope, find new ways to change, and make a difference in a person's life. I wish you all the success in the world. I wish you all the hope that comes from understanding pathways, willpower, and goals. Thank you.